Hello everyone. Welcome to the final few lectures of Tableau, and I hope that you're liking these courses so far. So absolutely feel free to connect with me via my website or LinkedIn if you have any questions. So I'll be happy to answer them. And all links are given in my profile or the notes or the description that goes with this course. So let's take some time and discuss a few concepts that you will need to use almost every day in your report development. Now, these are typically called as calculations or creating calculated fields. I know that we briefly touched upon them here and there, but let me also introduce you to some more useful functions that you may use it in your day-to-day while creating reports. So think of calculated fields just like your Excel formulas, right? So you kind of punch in some formula in a cell and it computes depending upon what values exist in the Excel workbook. So they help you to manipulate a number, a string, a date, etc. It is the same concept in Tableau, but we call them as calculated fields. So you can either do it inline or you can actually create a new calculated field, and I'll show you both the ways of doing it. Now, when we talk about calculated fields, there are certain things that we need to discuss, right? One is something called as level of detail. Then there is some table calculations. Then there is some logical date and string functions. These are the common things that you will use in your day-to-day work. All right, so let me open up Tableau. And the first thing I wanted to discuss is the level of details, or called as LOD. Now, when you refer the documentation and other areas, I understand that this might be a little confusing, and hence I've tried to make it as simple as possible, right? So let me go ahead and first connect to the saved data sources. This data source ships along with Tableau installation, so I'm going to just open that. And first and foremost is, what is LOD, right? LOD is nothing but it is used to define the level of aggregation, right? So let me show you how that works. Now let's assume that I have region. So I have about 5 regions here, and let's say I have sales, right? So I'll do this as average. And what can you infer from this particular report? What it is doing is it is taking the averages at region level, right? Now I introduce one more column over here, and I'll call that as state. Now what do you observe? You observe that the averages have changed. Now it is actually taking into consideration the state level, right? So what I'm saying is your metrics, your aggregations, the levels of the aggregations will change depending upon what columns you have in your report, right? And LOD is basically a way to control that level of aggregation. So I hope you're with me so far. All right, so now given this particular situation, if I ask you, how do I actually have this particular table but still aggregate at a region level? How do I do that, right? And that's where the concept of LOD comes into place. Now, before I actually show you, in terms of some code, let me actually just plot this, right? Now let me just duplicate this sheet, and then I'll plot this as a graph. Okay, and what I'll do is I will actually just actually let me delete this, and let me just choose a few of them so that we have very less data to work with. Right now, if I actually duplicate this and then plot this as a graph, you'll see that I have minimal stuff over here, right? So let me just make sure that I show the states. So if I hover on the states, you see that in the tooltip there is region, there is state, and average sales. Now if I move my mouse to another state, it shows the average sales for that state. So observe the average sales, it keeps changing, right? Now if I've given you a situation, say you have to, irrespective of whatever you hover, I want to show the average sale of East, region equal to East in the tooltip. How do I do that, right? And that's where the trick of LOD comes into play. Now let me go ahead and just show you a calculation, and let's call this as LOD. And the first form of LOD is called fixed LOD, and I'll walk through this in a brief. There are three types of LODs: fixed, include, and exclude, and we're talking about a fixed LOD. All right, so I'm saying fixed region, and what does fixed really does is that it will aggregate your measures as per your mentioned column name in this particular calculation, irrespective of what you drag and drop in the report. So to make it a little bit more clear, what I'm doing is I'm saying use the fixed level of detail and aggregate everything at region level, irrespective of what I have in my report. And this particular aggregate the sales, right? So this is one way, and what I can do is I can just use that in the tooltip, right? So before I go and use that, so I'll go to my table and then show you how this looks like. So if I drag and drop this, you see that it has a common value, right? Now this value is same as aggregating at regional level. So if you remove state, you see that it should be the same, right? When you introduce state, that is where the level of aggregation started to split up, but using the fixed function, we are controlling that split. So what we are saying is, irrespective of what we drag and drop here, even if we drag and drop say city over here, it doesn't matter. It will always aggregate at a region level. See, it is repeated. That is what is called as a fixed. So going back to our sheet, what we could probably do is actually go to our tooltip and say that average sales for this, and then something like this, right? Average sales for region is what we just created. Let me just go ahead and also introduce that into our tooltip, and then we should be able to use that. All right. So now when I hover on this, you see that the average sales for central is 876, the second line, and irrespective of what I move, the other values change, but the aggregation remains the same. That is the power of the fixed function. So I hope that gives you some clarity, right? So if this is clear enough, the include and exclude clauses for the LOD would be a little bit more simpler. So the second technique, one more before I actually go further, there is one more way you can kind of check this. Go to totals and say add all subtotals, and it kind of shows you the overall subtotal. Now in this case, just change this to average. Shouldn't change much because we use the formula for it. Okay, so going to include. The second technique is called as the include clause, and what it does is it says that always aggregate on whatever columns you have on your screen on your report plus whatever you include in the include clause, right? I know this might be confusing, so bear with me here. So if you see, you have two columns here, right? So meaning if you have a particular measure that is dropped in, you basically have to aggregate on both the levels, in this case at state level, right? And whatever you use in the include clause. Now, how do you write the include clause? Same as that, right? So you say that LOD, maybe I'll just call this as include, and I'll say state. And what I'm doing over here is I'm just saying that include state average of sales. Okay. And just making sure the syntax is right. All right. So if I drag and drop, actually to make it a little bit more simpler, let me just reduce the size. So if I drag and drop this one, what it does is, see your average. Let me just change this to average. So your average is about 856. So what this says is that aggregate at whatever levels you see on your report and also include state, because we basically added state to be compulsorily included in this aggregation. Now, fortunately, state is already there in our report, right? So it doesn't have to bother. So here it's 856 over here. So what it is doing is it's doing at region and state level and also including state, which already exists in the report. which means that if I actually remove state, it will still be 856, because what it says is include whatever is on the screen, whatever is on your report, in this case region, and add also whatever you have mentioned in your calculation. In this case it is state. So if you remove or add state, it doesn't matter, it will always consider state, right? So that is the fundamental difference. And the next one is called exclude. Exclude is the other way around. So what it says is whatever columns you have in your report minus whatever you have mentioned in your calculation, right? So for example, let's say that you have state over here, right? And then you have city. And let's just make it a little bit more simpler, so that you have less data to look at. All right. So I'm going to create a new calculation over here, and we'll call this as LOD exclude, and we'll do it by whatever, right? City. And the syntax is pretty much similar. So you say exclude city, average of sales. So what this says is that irrespective of whatever is on the screen, include everything, but always exclude city in your level of aggregations. So if I actually drag and drop city into this picture, exclude city, and make sure that it is average, this is the exclude. Let me just make sure. So basically it is excluding whatever is at the city level, and it is including everything else, right? So if I actually remove city, it will still be 710, because even if you included city in the picture, it didn't matter, it automatically excluded because you mentioned that in the query, right? So that is the fundamental difference in this. And LOD are very, very powerful functions that you can use, or calculations you can use. Depending upon what kind of graphs you want, what level of aggregations you want, these are really, really useful. Okay, since we are talking about calculations, let me actually show you a couple of more things, right? So one of the things is running totals. So you have regions, and then you have sales, right? Now if you want to know that how much does each row, how much do they contribute in terms of percentages, there is basically something called as quick table calculations, where you just go to quick table and say % of total, and it shows you the overall percentage contribution. You can definitely just use the values also to see side by side, but if you add all this up, it will account to 100, right? So that is kind of one way of doing it. The second one is definitely if you let's actually do this. Let's do sales, and let's do region. Actually, let's do something different here. Let's do the ship date, and let's remove region, right? And let me plot this in a graph. Now this is basically just showing you year over year revenue, but if you want to kind of make this as a running total, you can definitely just go here and make this as a running total, and it will show you a climbing graph, right? So again, depends on your requirement. You can go ahead and modify the tooltips and all those formatting techniques that we discussed. Then the next thing is you can definitely write your own aggregations, depending upon what you need. Like for example, let's go ahead and check out a few things, right? So let's say you have region, and then you have sales, right? And you can write your own calculations here, and you can just say something like custom calc, and say if region equal to say central, then average of sales, else median of sales, something like this, end. Now, one thing you'll observe is definitely this is not working out for a simple reason is this one, but still it shouldn't work out. So the reason being, you have an aggregate and a non-aggregate comparison, and to kind of get around with this problem, and this is a problem you'll always face when you're writing calculations, is using the ATTR or attribute keyword. And so once you add this, you should be fine. And now you can actually drag and drop your custom calculation into this. So it'll go ahead and compute that, right? So couple of such things. Let me actually cover one more thing. Let me cover the length function. Say length of alphabets, call something like this, and I'll say length of say region. Let's just keep it simple. And it'll basically just count the number of characters. Length of region. It is a measure. So I'll make this as a dimension and then drag and drop. And you see the length of characters over here. So some simple straightforward stuff, a lot of things you can do. If the best way to learn this is when you say create a calculated field, it has all those calculations that Tableau offers, along with a simple explanation and an example. So I personally do it this way. So but I'm just discussing all the common things that you would need when you are actually creating the reports. Definitely there'll be some advanced stuff over here as well. So let's actually take one more before we conclude this. So let me create a new sheet and let's see if we have something interesting. Okay, so we have customer name, and we talked about custom splitting depending upon some parameters in our previous lectures, and that was done at a data source layer, right? And here you can do it at a report layer also. So if you right click on customer name and say that create a transform and say custom split, it says how should you split it. And if you see, the names are separated by spaces. So if we just say space and then split the maybe the first two columns or something like that, or just split everything, it'll actually create 3 columns. I didn't split it properly. Let me try that one more time. Transform, custom split, space, all. Okay, so now it has split it. So this was the first one. You see that Aaron is the first split, this is the second split, and this is the third split. So naturally, if your names are actually separated by semicolons or anything like that, all you need to do is just manipulate that that splitting entity, and then you should be fine with that. So couple of things you can do, and remember, all these calculations are done at the Tableau layer, right? It's at the report layer, it will not be reflected in your data or anything like that behind the scenes. It is all computed at runtime when somebody loads the report. So those are the few things I wanted to share with you. I'll try to record one more lecture with some more tips and tricks, and then what are some advanced courses and what are some advanced things you can do in this field in order to kind of grow in the data science and analytics as well. So hopefully you like the course. Please feel free to connect with me or join via my website, and then we can I can try to answer any questions you may have. Thank you very much.